Hello everyone. In the previous videos we built containers, a container for a console app, AskAquarium, and we made it available on Docker Hub. So what I want to do in this video is I'm going to create a container for running a web app. So we're going to do a little more. It's going to be my web app, and I'm going to maybe gloss over some of the basics. So please watch the other videos if you're not clear on what's going on, or if you don't know anything about Docker. So let's go. So the app that I want to deploy is in this directory here. It's just some sample code that I used when I was teaching JavaScript last term. So it's some very basic index HTML. I'm using Babel to parse the JSX, and it uses React. And the source, so the Java is in here. The JavaScript is in here, and this is the HTML that I'm going to use. So let's have a look at the JavaScript. Maybe I'll use less. So here we have just a sample app. It's not doing anything super fancy. It's using an API to retrieve information, to look up information about the temperature, and we download also an image. So you put in the city, and it gives you the temperature and an image to go with it. So there we go. Nothing super fancy. But that's the app that I want to deploy. So I'm going to deploy it. The information I need to deploy this app is in this Docker file. So this Docker file, we're using the base alpine image. And again, that's a small footprint image. So I could use here Ubuntu and Apache 2, or I could use Ubuntu and Nginx, or I could use CentOS and Apache and so on. But I want to make this a small footprint, and I'm not doing anything super fancy. I'm just delivering some code I'm just delivering some static web pages in JavaScript. So we use this small image. That's our first layer. The second layer is a label. The third layer, I want to install the web server. So I'm using, since Apache is lightweight, I also want to use a lightweight web daemon. All I'm doing is serving pages, so I don't need anything fancy. I'm using this lightweight web daemon, lighthttpd. So I use the package management system on Apache APK. That will look in the repos and download that for me and put it on my image. And then the next layer, workdir, is like a change directory. So what I'm doing here, let me just highlight that. So what I'm doing here is I'm changing directory into that directory. And the reason I'm doing that is that is the default document root for lighthttpd. So on any web server, the document root is where you put the content. So the content is those two files. I want to put it in there. So once I change that directory, I copy it. So I just need those files. They're in that app directory. So I copy them over to the current working directory, which I had set up here in workdir. And then I expose port 80. So because this is a web server, it will bind to port 80 by default. And I want to expose port 80. So inside my container, the web server is bound to the IP addresses and listening on port 80. And then finally, my last part is what will happen when I run this container. So this is for building the image. All of these layers are for building the image. All of these commands add layers to the image as it's built. And the last one says what happens when I use this image, run this image using a Docker engine, and it becomes a container. So what I want to do then is I want to launch the web service. Excuse me, the web server. I will give it the option -d, which happens to be to make it into a daemon, -f to use this config file. So if I want to put anything special, I can put it in that config file. And you can have a look, and if there's anything you want to configure in lighthttpd, you can have a look at you can Google it. The configuration information is out there. So that will build this is the instructions to build my image. So let's do that. Let's build the image. I'm going to call it weather. My tag is weather, and I'm just going to default to latest. So I need to use the dot. So the dot says look in the current working directory to pull the Docker file and follow the instructions in there. So what it does is it goes through all of the entries, and the first one pulls my image. It's already on this computer because I've used Alpine before, so it's using that. That's my first layer. My second layer will be the label. And then it looks in the repositories and downloads and installs everything that it needs for lighthttpd, and that's my next layer. And then finally, the fourth layer is the CD. So this is kind of an intermediate container that we don't really need. It just does the change directory. And then I expose the port that it will run on. And finally, I set up my entry point, and I have built the image. So here we see there's my weather image. The weather latest is the tag. This is the image ID. It was created 40 seconds ago, and it's very tiny. It's 11 meg. So I can also use Docker inspect to see sort of what's in the image. Of course, I can't see the binary stuff. Weather latest. So I just hit tab and it defaulted. And let's pipe that into less. So here we go. The tag is weather latest, and then there's some digest information and whether or not standard out and standard error will be attached by default. Here's my entry point, and here's it pulled out of the command itself. Here we have the labels, and then there's other things that I can set, but I have chosen not to. We want to keep this pretty simple, and all of that information is in here. We want to have a look at it. So now I want to run this application. So in order to run this application, I need to do something a little different to what I've done previously. So the terminal app was one thing. This is a web app. Docker. I want to detach it. So just like a web server, I don't want it to be running on the console. I want it to be run as a daemon. So this will detach it and let it run in the background. And then I need to do some port forwarding. So because in my container, I expose port 80. That's fine, but there's no way to get it. If I don't use this command, there's no way to get at port 80 on the container. So what I want to see here is port 80 on the container will be available as port 8888 on the local host. So that's only for the local host. Here, I'm going to change this to 123. It doesn't really matter what I use, provided it's not already used. And so this is available only on the local host, unless I also open up my firewall. So there are 3 layers. There's the container. So the container, I won't be able to get to it unless I do this port forwarding. So the port forwarding goes to the local host from the container 80 to the local host 8123. And then if I want it to be accessible from other than the local host, I have to also open my firewall. So port forwarding, we need that. And now the name of my image is weather. So now I'm going to run it. Oops, something wrong with my syntax there. Oops, I forgot the run. So Docker needs those subcommands in order to do anything. Whoops. Docker run. And now if I run Docker PS to see what's actually running, here we have it created a container for me. So this is the image. The image is kind of a binary that sits on your system. In order to run it, it has to be launched by the Docker daemon, and it runs as a container. The image I used is weather. This was the startup command created 5 seconds ago, up 4 seconds. And here's the port forwarding to the local host. So let's have a look at running the app. Oops, I've already done it previously. So here we go. Here's my weather app that's running. So let's try. Notice I'm using 127.0.0.1.8123. So let's try Honolulu. So there I'm using my app. Let's try somewhere further north. How about Montreal? So my app seems to be working fine. It's talking to the API. So now I've deployed it. I've actually set up my app. But this image is only available on this local host. So the Docker daemon, it's a daemon. So it's anybody who logs on to this system. So for example, Sue, I have the user Sue on here. If she logs on, she can run it no problem, but it's only on this system. So if I want to make it available to other people, what I have to do is put it on the Docker Hub. So I'm going to show you that quickly because we're running up on the 10 minutes now. So to use Docker Hub, you first have to log on and get an account. And then you have to create a repository. So I'm going to create a repository. I'm going to call it weather. Use a weather API. I would probably make this more explicit. I just want to do this fast. Use a weather API to show temp and image for places. So it's not very good. It's public. I'm not going to set any of the build settings. So now I'm going to create it. So now I have created my image, and I've never pushed anything to it. So in order to make this useful, so this is kind of like using a Git server. I set it up, but I have to put something in it. So now this is what it'll look like if anybody looks at it. Normally I would also add a README. So now what I need to do is I need to push my image from my VM to Docker Hub. If I had not already done so, I would need to run docker login in order to have my credentials for accessing Docker Hub put onto this system. But I've already done it, and it set up my credentials here in my home directory .docker config JSON, so I can just push to Docker Hub. But if I had not done it, I need to do docker login and set my information here. So now docker. In order to tag it, I need to redo the build. So it doesn't really redo the build because all of the images are there. It's actually going to use the same image. So if I look at Docker images, I see that weather and Trisha weather are actually the same image. So now that I have given it that tag, I can do that push. So what it's doing is it's pushing it to the Docker Hub. And now I'm going to, once it's up there, I can now run it from wherever I want to. So now this is from my Windows box. Let's open a new one. I'm going to open a new one, and here we go. So now what I want to do is Docker. This is a completely different computer. Docker run. I need to make it a daemon. I need to do the port forwarding. Doesn't really matter what port. I can use whatever port I want. But the internal port, so the port on the one on the left is on the local host. The one on the right is on the container. I have to use 80 for that. Trisha weather. So now it's going to download that, and I need to, if I want to access it once it's completed, go. Oh, port is already in use. So what I'm using it for something else. So it's already downloaded, so it should just launch it as that. So let's have a look, Docker PS. And there we go. So 8888. Still good. 127. What did 8? What did I use? 8111. So now I have the application. Now let's try Honolulu again. And my application is running. So now that I've put it in the Docker Hub, I can very easily run it from anywhere that has a compatible Docker engine. So this is actually running on my Windows box. Oops, sorry, killed that. It's actually running on my Windows box. So hopefully this was helpful. I think it was a bit messy at the end, but hopefully it still shows you something.